Obviously, it was a difficult game, and you know the nice thing I think about for our football team, for our players, is we have an expectation to win those games, and so consequently, it even I think becomes a little bit more crushing. Now, I thought our defense played really well, and they're going to be tested extremely this week by some of the things that Georgia Southern does. Offensively, I don't think we played as well, and obviously it wasn't just Alabama, which they are outstanding on defense and maybe one of the better defensive groups that we've seen since we've been here, but just not making as many plays as what I'd like to see us make. We had some drops. We had some things that are really critical that you know that you make those type of plays in those type of games. And then frustrated with our discipline overall as a whole. Had some missed assignments on offense, way too many, and we'd been pretty clean. Had some missed assignments on defense and even in the kicking game. And whether it be the venue or the team or whatever, I don't know that we handled that, especially some of our younger players that I was hoping would show up a little bit more. I think they got a little bit of the big eye, and hopefully we've learned another lesson along those lines. You know, it was I think a really frustrating game for us in a lot of ways, just because of that every time that we seemed to start gaining some momentum, a penalty would pop up, and we've been one of the least penalized teams in the country, and here we are one of the most penalized teams right now. And so we've talked to the team about maintaining some discipline along those lines and maintaining the focus, and that's obviously what we'll have to do this next week against a very good Georgia Southern team. Willie Fritz has done a tremendous job there since taking over that program. The support they're getting down there is out of sight. I was really impressed last year with the crowd and their facilities and all those kind of things. Offensively and defensively, and I guess even in the kicking game, we're going to see some really different things than what we've seen all year. And as I've continued to mention, one of the challenges is those teams that can transition from week to week. Those tend to be teams that are way ahead of everyone else, and that's one of the focal points for us. Georgia Southern's an option-based offense. It's one of the few that we're going to see this year, and they're very good at it. Their quarterback's outstanding. He does a really nice job in doing it. They're running more formations than what they did last year, and so they even make it more complicated. They got an outstanding running back, and obviously leading the nation in rushing yards. Time of possession is going to be a factor, obviously, in this ball game, because that's kind of the nature of their style of offense. And then defensively, I think they're improved from what they were last year, and I've been really impressed with kind of what they've done defensively. They give you an awful lot of multiple looks that we really haven't seen this year, again. And so this is going to have some uniqueness for us on both sides of the football. And then their kicking game has been very consistent. They play extremely hard, and they play very disciplined, and so that's part of the reason why they've had success. Questions?
Coach, on the way back from Alabama, Georgia Southern was playing against Idaho. Sorry, I don't have the mic. Did you get a chance to watch that game at all and kind of get that sneak peek of what's to come this week?
No, I didn't, but obviously I was able to. One of the really interesting things about technology nowadays is I was able to drop all their previous games down other than that one on the iPad. And so I kind of focused on that one, so that way whenever I got back we could start looking entirely at the last ball game to see how much kind of changes that they'd made over that time frame, because obviously their quarterback had changed. And you know, he was suspended, I think, for the first 2 ball games of the season, and so wanted to get a little bit better feel for kind of how they were adjusting with him being back in the game now. But yeah, technology is amazing that I was able to sit there and watch, you know, both sides of the football on the iPad on the way back, and kind of, you know, certainly it was a quiet bus ride back, and so I had some opportunities to, you know, spend some time in viewing that.
Okay, well, you mentioned Georgia Southern's running game, but then kind of turning your attention to your own. It was really tough sledding against Alabama.
Yeah.
Obviously, not just the entire offense, but even you look at the rushing numbers, you know, 31 carries and 9 yards. How do you go about addressing your own running game and trying to get that fixed, especially since you're in a position where you're looking for options for guys that are going to make plays for you right now without Caesar?
Yeah, it's obviously the offensive game plan didn't come to fruition the way that we'd liked for it to. We knew going in we wanted to control time of possession in the first half, and we were able to do that, quite honestly. Now, we weren't able to gain some of the yards that I would have liked to have got during that time frame, but we wanted to be in striking distance in the third and fourth quarter, and we were at that point in time. We tried to set some things up there in the second half. Unfortunately, a lot of that was going to be going through Rashawn. We were going to try to isolate Rashawn, and unfortunately he got hurt. It was going to be tough running the football against Alabama, and the reason why is because they're Alabama. Very few people have had much success running the football against Alabama. Their front four is dominant, and then the way that they play their coverage, their safeties are so involved because of their ability to be able to play man coverage on everybody else, that their safeties come down, they fit off the edges, and so. But I would have liked to have seen better execution. But we knew it was going to be a tough matchup, and kind of like some other games that we've played, the passing game needs to open some of those things up, some of those opportunities, and we never got the passing game open either. And that was probably a little bit more frustrating. Was in the first half we thought we might be able to throw the football and loosen some of those safeties up to where they weren't able to come down in the box.
That's the thing people then kind of need to understand there about this offense and how it works is your preference as a coach is you want to be able to throw first and to set up that run. So when they're looking at, why are we running the football or why aren't we giving back some more carries, you're trying to do it this way and then have that open up down the road.
Well, I think that my preference is to win. I don't really care whether we run it or throw it, quite honestly. I think you have to look at your personnel and say, where are the good matchups? And for us, sometimes those matchups might be on the perimeter. Against Alabama, trying to they're pretty good up front, all the way across the board. Got a guy that's probably going to be a first-round draft pick at defensive line, one at linebacker, and who else knows what else is coming out. And that's kind of difficult whenever we've got a guy like maybe Rashawn Caesar or Jalen Holly or one of those type of guys that we can match up on the perimeter with. And so there's some games a la Nichols where we ran the football quite a bit. There's some games a la Alabama where that matchup is much more difficult. And so I'm not going to necessarily ask our guys to do things that, quite honestly, is very difficult to do, along with the fact that very few people outside of maybe Ole Miss have had much success with that.
Where do you think then those matchups favor you guys on offense this week against Georgia Southern?
Well, that's going to be interesting to find out on Saturday, isn't it? So, we're always going to prepare game plans on both sides of the football with the idea that you never know in college football exactly what you're going to see anymore. As I mentioned, Georgia Southern on offense is they're into all these different formations now. And so what functionally you might have seen the previous week is maybe not what you're going to see as much of. And so you have to kind of cover everything. They're throwing the football more right now, Georgia Southern is, than what they've attempted in the past also. And the young quarterback, not the young quarterback, but the young man's really grown up, I think, in throwing the football. And so, defensively, they have, they're odd front, they're even front, so they're mixing all those things. Sometimes they're blitzing everybody, and sometimes they're dropping 9. And so we just need to kind of come out and see how they really want to play us, and then we need to take advantage of kind of what they're giving us. It doesn't mean that we're not going to try to run it or try to throw it. It just means that we'll get a feel for what they're going to do there in the first quarter against us, and then we'll adjust the game plan accordingly based off of what they're going to give us. And if it's the run, then we need to be able to run it. If it's the pass, we need to be able to throw it.
You guys limited Alabama to under 38 yards on the ground and 160 up top. What do you guys take from that game defensively? How do you guys apply that to Georgia Southern, who scored like 135 points in their last, 3 or 4 games?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I was really, really proud of our defense. And it doesn't surprise me. We've got some really good players over there, and we played well on that side of the football. And we had a few miscues that I would have liked for, some alignment problems at times. And those are things that we've got to get addressed partly because of this week. But Georgia Southern's style of play is much, much different than Alabama's style of play. And so, this will be a brand new challenge for our defense because this one's totally different than the last one. And again, as I said earlier, and that's the challenge every week now is every week there is there's going to be new difficulties and there's going to be new opportunities, and we have to gain those opportunities and use those to our advantage, and those ones that become more difficult for us that we have to overcome, those situations. So brand new style of play and this week, and so that's going to be the real challenge.
How much does your offense change, if at all, with the amount of injuries you've had at receiver position?
Well, I think that you're always on offense looking for opportunities for matchups. Again, it just tears me up when I see a young man get injured. It really does. Even if he's a guy that is maybe not playing as much, just because you recognize how hard they've worked, what they've put into it. Rashawn has certainly done that. I think one of the difficulties probably for us right now offensively is, 4 of the top 8 receivers going into the season are basically out right now. And so some of those opportunities that maybe you had to be able to try to stack people and do some of those other kinds of things to try to create some of those matchups are a little bit more difficult. But, this is some opportunities for some young players to step up. And I'm talking about some of the not necessarily young, but players that maybe haven't had as many snaps. And I'm expecting them to do it. That's what they have to do now. And so, but does it change your framework to some degree? Sure it does. Do you have to maybe simplify your offense to some degree? Sure you do, just because they don't have those experiences, and especially with the redshirt freshman quarterback. But everybody's got to step up, right? The offense needs to step up. Our defense stepped up this last week. It's going to need to continue to do so as we start, again, it's a team game, and as we continue to try to grow some guys up.
How was Garrett Phillips? I know he got sacked like 6 or 7 times on Saturday.
He's sore. Yeah, he's sore. They, again, we knew there was going to be some tough matchups for us. We tried our best to try to get rid of the football early in the game as quickly as possible. But as the game progressed, obviously you had to start trying to create a little bit more and extend the ball down the field a little bit more. And the field position, once again, which was we kept pretty much pretty close there in the first half. In the second half, it got way out of hand, and that created problems for our offense and our defense. And we've got to, continue to obviously try to gain some first downs early, and especially early in drives, so the field position's changing. Same thing from a defensive perspective in terms of stopping some of those early drives to try to change field position. And then our kicking game. But these are all, again, teachable moments. They're learned behaviors, and guys have an opportunity to grow up. And we've played against 2 ranked teams that are pretty good teams. We played against one FCS program, so this is going to give us, I think, a little bit more of an indication in terms of that this is another FBS program that is currently not ranked. And so this will be, I think, a little better indicator of all those kind of things right now, rather than necessarily comparing us to Alabama.
Going back to those sacks, how many of those do you attribute to just Alabama's front 7, which is one of the best in the country? How many of them were mistakes by the offensive line?
We didn't really have that many protection problems up front, so I would attribute an awful lot of that to that. Actually, most of the mistakes kind of became in some of the run game things, and it wasn't necessarily always the offensive line. And then we had some mistakes at receiver, where, again, as guys were having to kind of move around to cover for some lack of depth, or, at one point in time, Trey Perrier went out, and that created, besides Rashawn being out, Trey was out, and that created some really unique things, and we weren't able to do some of the things, again, that we'd kind of hoped to be able to do there in the second half that we'd been able to that we were trying to set up because of some of those issues, because guys, again, had not necessarily practiced that position significantly.
With the start of conference play, how do you handicap the race right now? And is it pretty much like it was in the preseason?
Oh, I don't handicap it in any form or fashion. I mean, I think that anybody that, quite honestly, that does at this point in time, Aaron, I mean, it's, Oregon was going to the national championship game, and Auburn was going to win the SEC, and not picking on those teams, but I think that you look at Utah, and where did Utah come out? I mean, it's way too early in the season to start saying this is where we stack and all that. Again, our conference schedule is much different than some of the other people in our conference. And so it's even from a statistical standpoint, when you start comparing statistics, those statistics are always, if you're getting into comparisons, you need to compare them against the people that you're playing also. And so what I think that we can do is we can take some confidence away from, again, we've played in some hostile environments. We know that I think that we have some opportunities within our football team. The team believes that they have opportunities. And now it needs to show forth against a very, very good opponent in Georgia Southern.
But obviously, Georgia Southern starting 3-1 and 1-0 in conference, and considering what they did last year, they're certainly one of the elite teams in the league.
Yeah, there's no question. Obviously, they won the conference last year. I think that probably Willie would say the same thing, and the only thing you have to do is go back through comparative scores within the conference. There's not significant amounts of difference in our conference in terms of teams. And it's going to be that team that can, as I said at the start of the season, I've said it every year since I've been here, it's that team that has the maturity to be able to handle all the transition, and it's that team that can stay healthy. That's who's generally won the conference, and again, you can just kind of go back. There's that much parity within our conference that all those things are the factors that I think are huge in having success in the conference.
So in your mind, then even statistics, so looking at some of your defensive statistics, which are pretty good, real good in the Sun Belt, you're not really worried about those until you're maybe 4 or 5 games into the conference race?
Well, I think that, yeah, because now, defensively, I think as I said, I think we had said at the very start of the season, I think our defense has got a chance to be really, really good this year. Should be, with the number of players that we have, the number of returning starters that we have, all those other kinds of things. And so the statistics should be good there, and they are. And that's good. I mean, that's, the way it's supposed to be when you've got that many returning starters back. But I do caution against getting too involved in statistics. I think statistics at this point in time in the season, as I mentioned, they lie an awful lot. And I went down through a bunch of other teams along those lines, and it's all about kind of who you schedule too, where you're playing, all those other kinds of things. So, I'll get more involved because I am involved a little bit in numbers and trying to play percentages and that type of thing. But they're skewed right now, and so here, midway through the season, all of a sudden, some of those things become a lot more relevant.
What's your take on defending an option team like Georgia Southern? Because I know, like, the cliche is to say, it's going to force us to play assignment football, but I mean,
It does.
Defense, you're playing assignment football on every play, regardless of what offense you're playing. But just how do you go about defending something like that? What makes it unique?
I think one of the things about option football is the fact that, from a defensive perspective, you want to, like you said, you got to play disciplined all the time. The more disciplined you are, the better you're going to be. But even if you have a busted assignment, the offense has to be either hitting that gap or attacking that void in that zone that was given up, or somebody lost their man and the quarterback has to see it. Option football, they're going to hit all of those things. And that's what's unique about option football is if somebody doesn't take their man, that guy still got the ball in his hand, and he's going to exploit that. And so consequently, everybody has to do their job. And option football tends to expose that more than just normal offenses do. And that's part of the reason why a lot of programs, not a lot, but there's not that many, but teams like Georgia Southern, certainly the academies, try to exploit some of those opportunities because of the fact that it does require tremendous discipline, and it does require that you make plays in space. You've got to be able to tackle in space. If your guy has the ball and you're responsible for him, you have to make the tackle.
Knowing that the defense really shined this past week at Alabama, did Nick Saban kind of give you a congrats on that defensive performance, at least post-game?
No, I mean, Nick came over and said that we played hard, and which we did, and we have an expectation along those lines that we're always going to play hard. But Coach Saban's, he's not going to be real chatty after games, and so you kind of know that. We had a good conversation before the game, and he was very complimentary of kind of the program and all those type of things. But that's kind of normal too, right? I was complimentary of their program also. So.
What was your message to the other receivers after Rashawn went down, and basically what did you tell them about stepping up pretty much?
Well, that's kind of it. It's, now you have an opportunity, and now it's time to kind of step up. And again, we were having to kind of play musical chairs over there because Trey Perrier was down also. One of the things that we've tried to do on both sides of the football is try to cross-train some guys just in case you have some injuries. Unfortunately, all of our cross-trained guys, other than a Jalen Holly now, are injured, and so we had to play some musical chairs over there on offense to get some people in positions. And for some of them, again, it was their first opportunities really to play significantly. And there were some goods and there were some bads. And again, that's part of the process and that's part of growing up. And so we just got to keep working them and allow them to grow up.
When you look at this game on its face, it's a conference opener against the defending champion. They still haven't been beaten in the league. And it's homecoming. So, I mean, you've got all the trappings of a big game. So do you agree with that sentiment?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think for coaches, every game's a big game. And I think for our football team, we have tried to establish as part of our culture just this mentality, which you guys get tired of hearing me say, but just being 1-0. And because 1-0 then all of a sudden makes that next game that big game. And, we very rarely have those opportunities to where we're playing down a level. We're always tending to play up a level in non-conference games. And so you've got to stay on this emotional high all the time. And then thus again, 1-0 becomes really, really significant for us to be able to learn from the past, good and bad, and move forward to the next step. And sometimes that's hard for young men to do, especially in today's social media craze and the peripheral, what we call the peripheral opponents, and even internally. Sometimes there's distractions, and so consequently, every ball game becomes a huge ball game. And this one's big for all those reasons that you said, but quite honestly, in my mind, it's big because it's the next ball game, and that's the way that I think the coaches approach it. And I think our team, for the most part, approaches it along those lines too, because I think that's kind of again part of who we are.